James Carter stands frozen in the restaurant doorway, his hand gripping the brass handle as he watches the scene unfold behind him. The waitress, Sarah Miller, holds the single-dollar bill between her fingers, her face calm, but her eyes blazing with something he's never seen before. The entire dining room has gone silent. Other patrons lower their forks, their conversations dying mid-sentence. The sommelier pauses with a wine bottle in his hand. Even the kitchen doors have stopped swinging. Sarah doesn't crumple the bill. She doesn't throw it at his retreating figure. Instead, she smooths it carefully, deliberately, and places it in her apron pocket with a dignity that makes James's chest tighten with something unfamiliar: shame. She looks up then, meeting his eyes across the crowded restaurant. Her gaze doesn't waver, doesn't flinch, doesn't beg for understanding or apology. It simply sees him, all of him. The petty cruelty, the casual dismissal, the emptiness that money can't fill. James realizes with growing horror that Sarah Miller sees exactly who he really is, and she's not impressed.
6 months earlier, James Carter owned the world. 3 restaurants, 2 hotels, a penthouse overlooking the harbor. Money flowed through his life like water, constant and unremarkable. He never counted tips, never checked receipts, never thought about the people who served his food and cleaned his tables. The Harbor Grill was his favorite evening spot. Expensive, exclusive, filled with people who understood the rules of wealth. James dined there twice a week, always ordering the same premium steak, always accompanied by different business associates who laughed at his jokes and deferred to his opinions. Sarah Miller had been working there for 8 months. She was 26, quiet, efficient in the way that good servers become invisible until needed. She brought his drinks without being asked, remembered his preferences, cleared his plates with swift precision. James barely noticed her existence, but Sarah noticed everything about him. The way he snapped his fingers for attention, how he interrupted conversations to take phone calls, the dismissive tone he used with anyone he considered beneath his status. She watched him treat other staff members like furniture. The busboy who stumbled under a tray of dishes earned a sharp look of annoyance. The sommelier who took too long explaining wine pairings received an impatient wave of dismissal. Sarah said nothing. She served his table with professional courtesy, accepted his minimal tips without comment, and maintained the pleasant facade that kept customers comfortable. But inside, something burned. Sarah worked 2 jobs to pay for her mother's medical bills. Every dollar mattered. Every tip bought groceries, covered rent, kept the lights on in their tiny apartment. She'd grown up understanding the value of money in ways that men like James Carter never would. She'd also grown up with dignity. Her father, before the accident that took his life, had taught her that respect wasn't earned through wealth or status. It came from how you treated people when you thought no one was watching. James Carter, Sarah realized, had failed that test every night she'd served him. Tonight felt different from the moment he walked in. James was agitated, his phone calls more frequent, his usual charm replaced by sharp irritation. His business dinner companion, Robert Greene, seemed uncomfortable with James's mood. Sarah approached their table with careful neutrality, sensing the tension that crackled between the 2 men. She'd learned to read the emotional weather of her tables, adjusting her presence to match what each situation required. But James barely acknowledged her presence. He was too absorbed in his conversation, too focused on proving his point to Robert, too convinced of his own importance to notice the woman refilling his water glass. "These people don't understand the value of hard work," James was saying, gesturing broadly with his fork. "They expect everything handed to them on a silver platter. No appreciation, no gratitude, no understanding of what it takes to build something real." Sarah's hand stilled on the water pitcher. She recognized the tone, the casual way wealthy people talked about service workers as if they were a different species entirely. "Service jobs are temporary," James continued, warming to his theme.
Anyone with real ambition finds a way out. The ones who stay are just comfortable with mediocrity." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing at Sarah with obvious embarrassment. But James was too caught up in his performance to notice his companion's discomfort. Sarah finished pouring the water and stepped back, her expression unchanged. She'd heard variations of this speech before, from men who'd never worked a service job in their lives, who'd never depended on tips to survive, who'd never had to smile while being dismissed and diminished. The evening progressed with familiar patterns. James ordered his usual expensive meal, complained about minor details, and treated Sarah's presence as an interruption to his important business discussion. But Sarah was watching now, really watching. She saw how James checked his phone during Robert's stories, how he interrupted with his own anecdotes, how he assumed his opinions carried more weight simply because he could afford to express them in expensive restaurants. She saw a man who had confused wealth with worth, who had never learned the difference between being important and being significant. When James finished his meal and pushed his plate away with satisfied indifference, Sarah knew what was coming. She'd seen this performance before, this calculated demonstration of power disguised as generosity. James pulled out his wallet, a thick leather thing that probably cost more than Sarah made in a week. He sorted through bills with deliberate slowness, making sure Robert could see the abundance of cash inside. Then James selected a single-dollar bill and placed it on the table with theatrical precision. "For your excellent service," he said to Sarah, his voice carrying just enough irony to make his meaning clear. Sarah looked down at the single-dollar bill. The dinner bill was over $200. A standard tip would have been $30 or $40. A generous tip might have reached $50. $1 was an insult, a deliberate, calculated humiliation designed to remind Sarah of her place in James's world. Sarah picked up the dollar bill slowly, feeling its crisp edges between her fingers. She could feel James watching her, waiting for her reaction, expecting gratitude or at least silent acceptance of his casual cruelty. Instead, Sarah looked directly at him for the first time all evening. Her eyes held steady, unwavering, filled with a quiet strength that made James suddenly uncomfortable in his expensive suit. "Thank you," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying no sarcasm, no anger, no plea for better treatment, just dignity, pure, unshakable dignity that no amount of money could purchase. James felt something shift in the air around their table, something he didn't recognize and couldn't control. For the first time in his adult life, James Carter felt small.
Sarah doesn't move away from the table immediately. She stands there, holding the dollar bill, her presence somehow filling the space around James and Robert in a way that makes both men shift uncomfortably. "You know," Sarah says, her voice still soft but carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet dining room, "my father used to tell me that you can measure a person's character by how they treat people who can't do anything for them." James' mouth opens slightly, but no words come out. This isn't the script he expected. Service workers don't philosophize. They don't make observations about character. They certainly don't challenge customers who can afford to eat wherever they choose. Sarah continues, her composure absolute. "He said that real wealth isn't about what you can afford to spend. It's about what you choose to give when no one is forcing you to give anything at all." Robert Greene stares at his coffee cup, clearly wishing he could disappear. Other diners have turned in their chairs, sensing drama, but not yet understanding its source. James tries to reassert control. "I don't think you understand." "I understand perfectly," Sarah interrupts, and the gentle firmness in her voice cuts through his bluster like a knife through silk. "You wanted to send a message tonight. You wanted to make sure I knew exactly how little you value my work, my time, my dignity." She holds up the dollar bill, not crumpled or torn, but displayed like evidence in a trial. Well, message received. James feels heat rising in his face. This isn't how these encounters are supposed to go. Service workers are supposed to be grateful, or at least silent. They're not supposed to have opinions, insights, or the vocabulary to express them so clearly. But here's what you don't understand, Sarah continues, and now there's something almost compassionate in her voice, as if she feels sorry for him. This dollar doesn't define my worth. It defines yours. The words hit James like a physical blow. Around them, the restaurant has gone completely silent. Even the kitchen noise has faded to nothing. Sarah carefully folds the dollar bill and places it in her apron pocket. I'll keep this. Not as a tip, but as a reminder. A reminder that some people measure their worth by how much they can diminish others. She pauses, her eyes never leaving James' face. And some people know their worth has nothing to do with other people's opinions. James realizes that everyone in the restaurant is watching now. The couple at the corner table, the businessman dining alone, the group celebrating someone's birthday. All of them witnessing his public dismantling by a woman he'd tried to humiliate. But Sarah isn't finished. I want to tell you something about the people you dismiss so easily. The busboy you were rude to earlier, he's putting himself through nursing school. The sommelier you ignored, he speaks 4 languages and has a degree in chemistry. James's chest tightens. He can feel Robert's embarrassment radiating across the table. And me, Sarah's smile is sad, but proud. I'm working 2 jobs to pay for my mother's cancer treatment. Every shift, every tip, every dollar goes toward keeping her alive. So when you leave a $1 tip on a $200 meal, you're not just being cheap. You're telling me my mother's life isn't worth your pocket change. The silence that follows is deafening. He can hear his own heartbeat, can feel sweat forming under his collar despite the restaurant's perfect air conditioning. Sarah straightens, her posture regal, despite her simple uniform. But you know what? My worth isn't determined by your tips. My mother's life isn't measured by your generosity. We have something you can't buy, no matter how much money you throw around. What's that? Self-respect. The words hang in the air like a judgment. Sarah turns to go, then pauses. Enjoy the rest of your evening, gentlemen. I hope it was worth it. She walks away with unhurried grace, leaving James sitting in the wreckage of his carefully constructed superiority. Around him, other diners slowly return to their conversations, but he can feel their glances, their whispered comments, their judgment. Robert clears his throat uncomfortably. James, maybe we should... Don't. James's voice is harsh, desperate. He can't bear to hear whatever Robert is about to say, can't face the look of disappointment and embarrassment in his business partner's eyes. James stands up abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. He needs to leave. Needs to escape the stares and whispers, needs to get away from the place where Sarah Miller stripped away his illusions and showed him exactly who he really was. But as he reaches the restaurant door, James makes the mistake of looking back. Sarah is serving another table now, her smile genuine, her manner warm and professional. She's moved on from their encounter, as if it cost her nothing, as if his attempt to humiliate her was merely a minor interruption in her evening. And somehow that hurts worse than anything she said. James Carter, for all his wealth and power, has become irrelevant to the woman he tried to crush. The realization follows him out into the night like a shadow he can't shake.
James drives home in a daze, Sarah's words echoing in his mind. His penthouse apartment feels different when he enters it. Larger somehow, but also emptier. The expensive furniture, the imported marble, the view that cost him millions, all seem meaningless after what just happened. He pours himself a drink from a bottle that costs more than most people make in a week, but the alcohol tastes bitter on his tongue. Everything tastes bitter now. James tries to call his sister Patricia, but she's at her book club. He calls his business partner Robert, but the call goes straight to voicemail. Even his personal assistant doesn't answer after hours. For the first time in years, James Carter is truly alone with his thoughts. He walks to his floor-to-ceiling windows and stares out at the city below. Thousands of lights twinkle in the darkness, each one representing lives he's never considered, struggles he's never acknowledged, dignity he's never recognized. How many Sarah Millers are down there? How many people working multiple jobs, caring for sick family members, fighting battles he can't even imagine? How many people has he dismissed, ignored, or actively hurt with his casual cruelty? James's phone buzzes. A text from Robert. We need to talk tomorrow. That was unacceptable. James stares at the message, understanding its implications. Robert isn't just talking about tonight's dinner. He's talking about a pattern of behavior, a way of treating people that reflects poorly on their business partnership. James has become a liability. The next morning brings worse news. Someone at the restaurant filmed Sarah's speech on their phone. The video is already circulating on social media, and James's face is clearly visible in the background, frozen in shock and shame. The comments are brutal. People sharing their own stories of being mistreated by wealthy customers. Service workers finding their voice, speaking up about the casual humiliations they endure for minimum wage and hope for decent tips. James has become the face of everything wrong with how the rich treat working people. His sister Patricia calls, her voice tight with disappointment. James, what were you thinking? $1? Really? James tries to explain, to justify his actions, but the words sound hollow even to him. How do you defend the indefensible? How do you explain casual cruelty to someone who raised you to be better? Dad would be ashamed, Patricia says, and the words hit James like a physical blow. Their father had built his wealth through hard work and treating people with respect. He'd started as a busboy himself, working his way up through the restaurant industry before branching into other investments. He'd never forgotten where he came from, never lost touch with the dignity of honest work. James has forgotten everything his father taught him. The phone calls continue throughout the day. Business associates distancing themselves, social acquaintances canceling dinner plans, the board of directors for his favorite charity asking him to step down from his position. James's reputation, built over decades, crumbles in hours. By evening, James finds himself driving back to the Harbor Grill. He's not sure why. Maybe to apologize, maybe to try to undo the damage, maybe just to see Sarah again and understand how she found the strength to stand up to him. But when he arrives, the hostess informs him that Sarah Miller no longer works there. She gave her notice this morning, the woman says, her tone carefully neutral, but her eyes holding judgment. Effective immediately. James feels the ground shift beneath his feet. Sarah is gone. The one person who might have accepted an apology, who might have helped him understand what he needs to change, has disappeared from his world entirely. Do you know where she went? James asked desperately. The hostess's expression hardens. Even if I did, Mr. Carter, I wouldn't tell you. That young woman has been through enough. James leaves the restaurant feeling more lost than ever. He drives aimlessly through the city, past the neighborhoods where people like Sarah live, past the hospitals where mothers fight for their lives, past the dreams he's never bothered to acknowledge exist. Sarah Miller has vanished into the vast anonymity of working life, taking with her the only chance James had for redemption. He returns home to his empty penthouse, surrounded by everything money can buy and nothing that matters. For the first time in his privileged life, James Carter understands what it means to be truly poor.
James spends sleepless nights researching Sarah Miller online, trying to find any trace of where she might have gone. Her social media profiles are minimal, private, offering no clues about her current situation or whereabouts. He considers hiring a private investigator, then realizes how that would look: a wealthy man stalking a working-class woman who had the courage to call out his behavior. The thought makes him sick. 3 weeks pass without answers. James's business suffers as partners distance themselves and deals fall through. The viral video has given him a reputation that money can't repair. But the professional consequences pale compared to the personal reckoning happening inside him. James visits the hospital where Sarah's mother might be receiving treatment, walking through hallways filled with families facing impossible choices between medical care and financial survival. He sees the exhaustion in their faces, the quiet dignity they maintain in the face of overwhelming circumstances. He thinks about Sarah, working 2 jobs while watching her mother fight for life. How many nights had she served his table while carrying that weight? How many times had she smiled professionally while her heart was breaking? James begins volunteering in the hospital cafeteria, serving food to families who can't afford the expensive meals he takes for granted. The work is humbling, repetitive, invisible. For the first time in his adult life, James learns what it means to serve others without recognition or reward. The other volunteers, mostly retirees and students, treat him with polite but distant courtesy. They've seen the video, recognize his face, understand who he is and what he represents. But they let him work. They let him learn. They let him begin the slow process of understanding what Sarah already knew, that true worth comes from what you give, not what you take. One evening, while cleaning tables after the dinner service, James overhears two nurses talking. "Did you hear about Sarah Miller? She finally got that scholarship to nursing school. Full ride plus a living stipend." James's hands still on the cleaning rag. "The waitress from that video?" The nurse nods. "Someone saw her story online and set up a crowdfunding campaign. Raised over $50,000 in 2 days. She starts classes next month." James feels a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Sarah has found a path forward, joy that strangers have recognized her worth, and deep sadness that his cruelty was the catalyst that brought her struggle to public attention. He goes home and writes a letter he'll never send. "Dear Sarah, I know you'll never read this and you have no reason to forgive me, but I need you to know that your courage changed everything. You showed me who I really was, not the successful businessman I pretended to be, but the empty, cruel man I'd become. You held up a mirror I'd been avoiding for years. I can't undo what I did. I can't take back that dollar or the humiliation I tried to inflict, but I can tell you that your dignity in that moment taught me more about strength than all my wealth ever could. You're going to be an incredible nurse. Your patients will be lucky to have someone who understands suffering, who treats everyone with the respect I failed to show. I hope you never have to think about me again, but if you do, I hope you can see that you didn't just defend your own dignity that night. You saved mine too. James." He folds the letter and puts it in his desk drawer, alongside the printout of Sarah's crowdfunding page and the scholarship announcement. They're reminders of what he lost when he chose cruelty over kindness, and what Sarah gained when she chose courage over silence. James continues volunteering at the hospital, working in obscurity, serving food to people who barely notice his presence. It's exactly what he needs, the chance to be invisible, to contribute without recognition, to understand the dignity that comes from serving others. Months pass. James's business relationships slowly improve as his behavior changes. He treats employees with respect, tips generously, and speaks carefully about people who work in service industries. But he never stops thinking about Sarah Miller, never stops wondering if somewhere in the city, a young nursing student remembers the night she taught a billionaire about the true value of a dollar, and whether, despite everything, she might someday find it in her heart to believe that people can change.
The ceremony is held in the hospital's main auditorium. James arrives early, taking a seat in the back row where he won't be noticed. He watches families fill the room, proud parents and siblings gathering to celebrate their loved one's achievements. When Sarah walks across the stage to accept her award, James's breath catches in his throat. She looks different, more confident, radiant with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has fought for their dreams and won. Her smile is genuine as she shakes hands with the hospital administrators. The presenter mentions Sarah's journey, from service work to nursing school, her dedication to caring for others, her outstanding clinical performance. But James knows the real story. The night she worked double shifts, the moment she found her voice, the courage it took to defend her dignity against someone who tried to diminish it. After the ceremony, James waits outside in the hospital lobby. He doesn't approach Sarah directly, She's surrounded by family and fellow students, celebrating her achievement. Instead, he watches from a distance as she embraces an older woman who must be her mother, alive and healthy and beaming with pride. Sarah notices him eventually. Their eyes meet across the crowded lobby, and James sees recognition dawn in her expression. For a moment, neither moves. Then Sarah excuses herself from her family and walks over to where James stands, still keeping a respectful distance. "Mr. Carter?" she says, her voice neutral but not unkind. "Congratulations," James replies, his voice rougher than he intended. "You're going to be an amazing nurse." Sarah studies his face, and James wonders what she sees there. The arrogance is gone, replaced by something he hopes might look like humility. "Thank you," she says simply. They stand in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. "I owe you an apology," James begins, but Sarah raises her hand gently. "No, you don't owe me anything. That night was never about you owing me anything. It was about me knowing my own worth." James nods, understanding that Sarah doesn't need his apology to heal. She healed herself, built her own path, created her own future without waiting for his recognition or regret. "I've been volunteering here, in the cafeteria. It's taught me a lot." Sarah's expression softens slightly. "I know. Mrs. Rodriguez in pediatrics mentioned it. She said you work hard, don't complain, treat everyone with respect." They look at each other, two people forever connected by a moment that changed both their lives in different ways. "I kept the dollar," Sarah says quietly. "It's in my textbooks now, pressed between pages about dignity and compassion and treating every patient like they matter." James feels his throat tighten. "What does it remind you of?" Sarah considers the question carefully. That the most important lessons come from the hardest moments. That standing up for yourself doesn't require anger or hatred. That sometimes the people who hurt us are just lost. She glances towards her family, waiting patiently across the lobby. "I should go. My mom wants to take everyone out for dinner. She's been planning this celebration for months." James nods, stepping back to give her space. "Sarah, I'm glad you found your path. I'm glad you never let anyone convince you that you weren't worth more than a dollar tip." Sarah smiles then, the first real smile she's ever given him. "Mr. Carter, I always knew I was worth more than that. The only person who needed convincing was you." She turns to leave, then pauses and looks back. "Take care of yourself. And remember, true wealth isn't what you can afford to spend. It's what you choose to give when no one is making you give anything." Sarah rejoins her family, and James watches them leave together, a group of people who have learned to find joy and dignity despite life's challenges. James stands alone in the hospital lobby, surrounded by the quiet activity of healing and hope. He thinks about the man he was 2 years ago, so certain of his superiority, so blind to the worth of others. That man is gone, replaced by someone who measures success differently now. Someone who understands that the most valuable tips aren't measured in dollars, but in moments of human connection, respect, and recognition. Sarah Miller taught him that lesson with a single dollar and the courage to claim her own dignity. It was the most expensive education James Carter ever received, and the only one that truly mattered.